Here we go. So you're Dr. Diane Duffy?
Yeah.
Okay. And where did you get your PhD from?
The University of Manchester.
Oh, very, very appropriate then.
Well, I did a part-time degree. I was a teacher and decided after I'd had my children to go back to study.
Oh, wow.
So I went back as a reasonably very mature student and stayed there for 18 years doing various things part-time. I did a BA honours because I'd got a B.Ed already. I did a BA honours, then I did an MA, then I did a PhD all part-time.
Wow.
So it took
cool.
quite a long time, as you can imagine. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think I will open us up and then we can talk about Elizabeth Gaskell.
Yes, of course. My studies actually were earlier. My research for my PhD was actually slightly earlier than Elizabeth Gaskell. But just to fill you in on the details of how I got into Elizabeth Gaskell, because I'm sure that's what you're going to ask me. As an English literature teacher, and I'd been so for a long time, I taught Elizabeth Gaskell in school, particularly Mary Barton for GCSE coursework, which of course I live in Manchester, so it's Manchester-based book, and it's so it was appropriate really. And I love Mary Barton. I love 19th century writing, and I love Mary Barton. So when I retired, and my husband, who was interested in history, we decided we needed something to do. So the Elizabeth Gaskell House had just opened. It opened in 2014. And so we decided that might be a nice place to work, because my husband had been ill, and it's a small, it's not really a museum, it's a house, it's a literary house. We don't like to think of it as a museum because that's a bit, you're not allowed to touch things in a museum, everything's in cabinets. It isn't like that at all. You can sit on the chairs, you can pick up the books, you can sit and read if you want to. It's one of those places where we try and welcome people and make them feel at home. We do tours, and it was just a lovely place to work. The staff are brilliant. It's like a little family, it's really good. So we all love it there. And so that's how I got into it. And now I'm a committee member of the Gaskell Society as well, and run the meetings there once a month during the winter time.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd heard that before about her house, that it is very much kind of more hands-on for visitors, and I
absolutely
like the sound of that. Yeah. Especially for people who travel there that are really devoted to her writing. I think it must be a really special experience. Then. Yeah.
We get a lot of international visitors. We get people from your country. We get lots of people from different parts of Europe, Sweden, Germany, even Japan. And we've got a very big following of Elizabeth Gaskell in Japan. And we have quite a large society in Japan, and her works have been translated into Japanese. So there's a big core of aficionados out there.
Do you know how it happened that she kind of took off with Japanese fans?
No, I don't actually. Maybe just there are a couple of people who publish criticisms on Gaskell out there in Japan. I've got one of them, one of the books here, Evil, and its variations in the works of Elizabeth Gaskell, which is an interesting title, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they just had good access to her and her novels over there. We've got quite a big following in Italy and Spain as well, as well as in your part of the world. I mean, I don't know if you know Nancy Weyant.
I do not.
Well, she's Elizabeth Gaskell's bibliographer, and she's from the East Coast. I think, I might be wrong, but Massachusetts, Boston, that kind of area.
Yeah.
And she's very good. She's a very good bibliographer. And what's really brilliant about it is she's brought the jugs and the bowls, the pot jugs and bowls that they use for washing in the bedrooms.
Yes. Yeah.
She's brought one of those, a set across various times from her home, It belonged to her great grandfather, who fought in the Civil War on the side of the freedom for the slaves in the north, presumably, on the north side. And of course, Elizabeth was keen to abolish slavery, even though she'd come from a big cottonopolis, they call Manchester, the big cotton centre of the northwest. So it's lovely that these things have come across from the East Coast, from a person who actually supported the same things that the Gaskells supported, and from the woman who's Elizabeth Gaskell's bibliographer. I just think that's a lovely connection.
That is a really neat connection. It's just special when you can find those artifacts like that. It's really nice to bring them to a
and she had friends over in Massachusetts, Samuel Dexter Bradford, who I think was quite important in that part of the world, and he'd lived in Manchester for a while, and he married a Manchester girl, and the Gaskells were quite friendly. He attended Cross Street Chapel before he moved back to Boston in somewhere around and about 1847, 6, 7, something like that. Might be an odd year out on the dates there. So that's another really nice connection. They attended his child's christening, and his wife wrote a criticism of Mary Barton for the local newspaper, Boston Observer or Times or whatever it was. So I mean, that's she's lots of connections. Harriet Beecher Stowe visited the Elizabeth Gaskell House in 1857. And she was a great friend of Charles Eliot Norton, who was the art critic.
Yes, that is I know I feel kind of, I don't know, defensive on Elizabeth Gaskell's behalf whenever people bring him up, because there was that book that came out a few years ago, and I guess it makes it look like she had this kind of love affair with him. And what is your take on that? Do you think she was kind of?
No, I'm with you. No, it'd make good telly though, wouldn't it? No, I don't think so. I think she was flattered by his attention. I think he was intelligent and she liked the conversation. He gave her a lot of attention, which she loved. She didn't like Robert Browning because he went to sleep when she was talking.
I remember reading that.
So she liked attention, and I think he gave her attention. He stayed in contact with the family even after Elizabeth had died. Meta writes to him regularly, even after her mother's death. So they were clearly quite close friends, but I think that's about where it was.
Yes. Okay. That was the sense that I had. And then does she have any living descendants?
Yes.
She does.
Okay. Yes, she does. She had 4 daughters that survived. She had a stillborn girl and 2 sons that died. One very tragically at 9 months old from scarlet fever. Which is why Mary Barton was born. Really, it was born out of his death. 2 of her girls married, Marianne and the eldest, and Flossie, the 3rd daughter. And only Marianne had children, but one of her children married and have got descendants now. One of them supports the house.
How wonderful!
There are 2 that we know of. A boy called Tim, and a girl called Sarah Prince. Prince is her married name, who's got children. So the descendants are carrying on through Sarah Prince. And she's quite supportive of the house. She comes up not frequently, but quite regularly. She lives in the southwest of England, so she comes up not for special occasions. She came up when we won the Queen's Award for voluntary work at the house in 2019. She came up then. We celebrated that. She comes up for Elizabeth's birthday sometimes. She comes up if we're launching things. She lends objects to the house. We got some of her lace in the new exhibition in the new bedroom. So she's quite she's very supportive, and she'll email people and give them information if she can, if she's got it.
Yes.
So that's nice.
That's wonderful. And speaking of the bedroom, this is a very exciting time for the house, because when is her bedroom supposed to be open to the public?
It's been open to the public since May this year.
Oh, it has. Okay.
Yes. And so it'll be part of our tours. It's part of our tours now. It's open on the open days, which are Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So yes, there are a couple of events on it coming up. You can check those on the website. I'm not fully sure of the dates. Might be next year, actually. Might be 2022. But one of our trustees, who's done a lot of work on the bedroom, is going to talk about the development of the bedroom. And there's another talk on it as well. I don't know whether Jane's doing that as well. So it's been promoted on the events list. So if you want to tune into that, we're normally doing them via Zoom at the moment, and I think we're going to carry on doing them via Zoom, even if we do them live in the house, so we can have a multimedia experience.
Which I'm very excited about that. That's something I've attended a couple of events, and it's just such a treat for me to get to see it from the comfort of my own home. And now, did you say, when we had emailed, I talked about how Gothic Tales is the Victober group read, which I'm so excited about, because, you know, I try not to be too sad that I've run out of novels to, you know, to have unread by her, but rereading is such a treat. And there's shorter fiction that I still haven't read yet. And so is there an event happening with Gothic Tales, but also just kind of what is it about Gothic Tales that you like in particular?
Well, yes, I'm running the event on Gothic Tales. In fact, I'm giving a talk this Halloween. I think it's the 20th, it's whatever the Wednesday is. So is that the 27th of October?
I think that sounds right.
That's right, yeah. On Lois the Witch and other tales. So I'm looking at witchcraft this year. Last year I did just a general sort of Gothic theme. On some of it, I looked at the Grey Woman and the Old Nurse's Story, which are, along with Lois the Witch, which are two of my favourites. And I would have said they were my favourites up until just recently, because I just think Lois the Witch is so clever. I really, the way she uses language, you know, looking at either or, and the way we language is so slippery, and how we use words, and to one society it means one thing, and to another it means something else. And it's just so clever the way she balances words, and the way she balances events, the rational against the irrational, and the way she looks at truth too, because I think that's so important to Elizabeth. As a Unitarian, she believed in truth, in telling the truth, in only revealing the truth. And to me, Lois is the only one there that's really telling the truth, and she is damned for it, which is just interesting. 2 years after Elizabeth was damned for publishing the Charlotte Bronte biography, warts and all, as we say, yeah. And I just wonder how much of that idea of telling the truth and being damned for it was going round in Elizabeth's head while she was writing this story.
That's, I a couple of years ago went through, it's the letters of Mrs. Gaskell. Eventually I want to go through the further letters, and I already adored her a lot, but it just, I loved reading through it so much. And my heart went out to her when she, after the publication of the biography of Charlotte Bronte, how she said, I've cried and cried more over this than anything else. And it's interesting to me, because it seems like at the time she made a lot of waves, because she kind of called out certain people in a way that was really offensive to people who were being called out. But nowadays, I feel like this biography is, people think it's really controversial because maybe the personal involvement that she had with the Brontes. So I haven't worked up the courage to read it yet, because I don't know what it will be.
You can read it in two versions are published now. The first edition is still published, okay. So you can read it along with the the bowdlerized edition, you know, the edited, the revised edition that she did the same year, because she went to Rome, of course, to get out of the way. She didn't want to be in the middle of the flak when she knew what would happen. What absolutely fascinates me is the fact that William had read this biography and still let it out. You know, you just think, if it's so controversial, why, oh why, as a minister, did you let that book go public? You know, she didn't leave a forwarding address, so nobody could contact her. And when she got back, she said, oh, I've got to do all these revisions, and I've only got, and I didn't know anything about it. Well, no, of course you didn't, because you didn't leave anybody an address. You know, I mean, it's really bad. It was bad for her. I appreciate that, but she knew what she'd done when she'd done it. You know, she knew, and her excuse is that she wanted to tell the truth. But the thing about it is that it really spoiled her worldview of biography, and she didn't want anybody to write her biography, and she asked people to burn her letters so they couldn't get out to the public, because she didn't want her life being, you know, aired for public view. And it's interesting that, because when you look at the amount of letters that we got, that book you're talking about is over 1,000 pages long. And the because I've got it on my shelf here, and the further letters, though it's a slim volume, is still over 200, well over 200. So fortunately they didn't burn all her letters. But there are still ones cropping up here and there, new ones that are coming out that we don't know about, and are just finding out about. The lady Fran Baker, who was the archivist at the John Rylands Library, which is in Manchester, which is where we have a large Elizabeth Gaskell collection. And there, a lot of it's digitized, so you can look at it online. Lots of Dickens stuff, lots of Charlotte Bronte and Gaskell stuff. It's a really interesting collection. And at the Brotherton in Leeds as well, where there's a fabulous letter from Fredrika Bremer, the Swedish novelist, to Mrs. Gaskell, which I don't think is published. So that's digitized as well, so you can read that online if you want to. We're still getting, Fran Baker found one at the Chatsworth House in Derbyshire, which is the Cavendish house, you know, down there, belonged to William Cavendish originally. And she found one in the library, tucked away in the library, one that nobody had known about. She moved there as archivist, and she just discovered this letter. So they are still turning up, you know. That was only a few years ago, about 2019.
Yes. Oh, that is so exciting that, you know, things are still popping up here and there. And it's interesting too to think about kind of this scandal that happened, all the waves that were made from the biography, because didn't she also, Ruth, her novel, The Story of a Fallen Woman, and that portrays the fallen woman, you know, this woman pregnant out of wedlock, who portrays her sympathetically. Didn't that make waves in William's congregation as well?
Oh yes, she one of the people in the congregation, a father of the family, burnt it.
Wow.
And because she writes to Eliza Fox, and would you have burnt the book if you'd have been a father of the family, and would you have withdrawn it from the London libraries, not fit for family reading? That's what she says to Eliza Fox. So she feels very uncomfortable in church after that. She goes to chapel, of course, and she has to sit near this man that clearly was very critical of her, very critical of her work. She writes how embarrassed she felt. You know, she felt, her words are, "I feel like a really improper woman," she writes. We are studying Ruth at the Gaskell Society this year, so we start in October. We're running our meetings on a Tuesday, and we're running our meetings via Zoom as well as.
Oh, wow.
Whether we can record them or not, because of course you're so far. Are you behind us? We're ahead of you. We are, aren't we? Yeah.
Yes, we're 5 hours.
we run. Oh no, we should be all right actually, because we run them at 2:00. So that's now, isn't it? So that yes. So we're discussing Ruth. The discussions in Knutsford, not a talk. They're discussions. So I'm hoping to run them via Zoom as well as live in Knutsford in October, and we'll be running them the last Tuesday of the month, October, November, and January, February, March, and April. So 6 meetings.
Wow, that is really exciting.
And so
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if anybody wants to join us, you're very welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, I will post in the description down below. I'll put links to all of the things. This is really great. So I think you're going to definitely have some participants.
Well, Lindsay, this is from the Gaskell Society I'm talking about now, not the house. Lois the Witch is at the Elizabeth Gaskell House.
Okay.
And I'm doing a talk on Mary Wollstonecraft as well in November. Ooh. Which is a repeat of one that I did, because we had so many people and we couldn't book them all. We only have 100 ceiling on Zoom at the moment. So Mary Wollstonecraft's influence on Elizabeth Gaskell. So it's a repeat of that talk that I did earlier. I did for International Women's Day. So that's November the 17th. If anybody's interested in that. And we got an event on Victorian children's literature this Wednesday, day after tomorrow, in the evening at 7:00. Professor, I can't remember her name now. She's a professor of literature, and she's giving that lecture. So you might be interested in those. Thank
you. Publicize. This is also good to know about.
And Lindsay, who's our webmaster, although she says she isn't, but she is, because she runs the website on the Gaskell Society, has got a list of all our events on there. So if you want to look at what the Gaskell Society are doing, or what we blogged, the information that we blogged, then that will be on the Gaskell Society website.
Oh, that's great. Now, I know we had mentioned briefly in the email that Elizabeth Gaskell has really been growing in popularity. So why do you think, though, for a time she fell off the radar, and then kind of how she's growing more in popularity?
Well, I have a theory. Certainly, Lord David Cecil, who was a critic of sorts, wrote a book about lady novelists, Victorian lady novelists. He also made a criticism of Elizabeth Gaskell's portrait, which is in the National Portrait Gallery and is also in our drawing room. It's a very famous portrait. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's used on the front of Winifred Garin's. I don't know if I hold it up, you can see it. I have got it on Zoom, but it'll take a minute to pull it up. Can you see that?
Yes, I love this portrait of her.
Right, so this portrait is in our drawing room as well, and it was executed by George Richmond in 1851, so the year after she met Charlotte Bronte. It's sitting side by side with Charlotte Bronte's Richmond portrait in our drawing room. So Elizabeth Gaskell was 41 when this was done. She'd had 7 pregnancies that we know of. And to me, that she looks pretty good. I wish, for a Victorian lady of that age, and having 7 pregnancies and 4 children surviving. So I'm going to just tell you what he said, because I think you, and I hope your female viewers will be horrified. He said, "You have only to look at a portrait of Elizabeth Gaskell, soft-eyed beneath her charming veil, to see that she was a dove. She was everything a woman ought to be. Was it prone to tears? Just a minute, I can't remember it all now. Unintellectual, prone to tears, easily shocked." This is what he said of her. So he published that, and then in his book of lady novelists, he went on to say that, pretty much paraphrase, she'd never been out of the Victorian drawing room.
Oh my goodness.
So clearly, the picture of Mrs. Gaskell sitting there in her apron, looking rather demure and doing her sewing, is absolutely, this is a woman who was Barbara Cartland's Fluffy Bunny Brigade, and somebody that, nobody should take any notice of because it's all trivial. And that came out in 1934. Because prior to that, Mrs. Gaskell had been very popular. I mean, during the 19th century, she had been very popular. Mary Barton was in 5 editions within, I can't remember how many years, but very few years of it being published. So even though it was controversial, it was very popular. And I just think people thought she was trivial. And if you read something like Mary Barton, and even Wives and Daughters, if you just read it without thinking about it, you could see why they might think she was trivial. You know, this is a bit of a romance, North and South. Oh, it's a bit of a romance. And she's got this political bit. Well, she doesn't really know what she's talking about. And suddenly, as you start thinking about it, really thinking about it, it's very complicated. There's an awful lot in there to think about. And the way she presents her work, you know, as an either or, with these contrasts to as almost control tests, you know, for you to look at, well, do I think this is right, or do I think this is right? It's a very complex and clever piece of writing. And I think suddenly audiences are sitting up and thinking, actually, that's good. That's actually good. Yes. And there's a lot in there to think about. The position of women, for instance, is very relevant to today. She wasn't a feminist politically, you know, feminist is political, but she wouldn't have been a suffragette politically. She wouldn't have gone out on the streets like the Pankhurst did. She wouldn't have approved of that. She disapproved of Frederica Bremer for spitting on the pavement because it wasn't ladylike. Mrs. Gaskell was a lady. She was, you know, and she thought ladies should behave like ladies. But she says, I think it's 1856, there's a letter to, again, Eliza Fox in London. And Eliza had sent her a petition to sign about the position of women, you know, wanting to give women more rights, more autonomy. And Elizabeth Gaskell writes back to Eliza Fox and said, I've signed this petition, but I don't think it'll do any good. She said, but I feel that women have too long been tyrannized over by men. And I think that sums her up, really. She disapproved of tyranny, but she didn't actually feel that she wanted to be overtly political about it, although she is in her novels maybe not overtly, but so perhaps subtly political about it in her novels. So I guess that sums her up, really. And she wouldn't want to be seen not to be feminine.
That is, it seems to be kind of the plague of plot-based novels often too, is they're just written off as kind of more fluff. But I think that makes North and South a perfect novel, that it has this really gripping plot, but the social conscience and the sweeping love story, and every single character is interesting in that book.
Yes.
And she's just
and it's politically viable as well, I think, and politically relevant.
Absolutely.
You know, and the workers' position against the manufacturers, their bosses, if you like, it's politically relevant even now. You know, social conscience is amazing, I think, and her fight for social justice, and this is still going on. You know, so why is she not relevant? And I think,
yeah. And so, how do you think, kind of, she compares with other Victorian authors? Is she your would you say she's your favorite Victorian author?
I don't like having favorites, really. I think, you know, I think favorites demeans of the others that are not your favorites, and I don't actually have a favorite. I think she's a good, I enjoy her work. I think she's a good writer. Interestingly enough, if your listeners would like to read Elizabeth Gaskell's Moorland Cottage, which was published in 1853, and George Eliot's Mill on the Floss, I think you'll see some startling similarities. But Elizabeth's came out first.
Yes, I've heard one of my friends on BookTube has said that she prefers Moorland Cottage actually over the Mill on the Floss. I really do like George Eliot as well, but I ironically did not like Mill on the Floss the first time that I read it, so I need to go back to it. But I did like.
I like George Eliot very much, but I can't say that I like her better or worse than Elizabeth Gaskell. I just adore the Brontes.
Oh yes.
So I can't
pick one. It's not like you have to because you like one, you can't like the other. So I totally sympathize.
I just hate this question. Which is your favorite? No, I can't answer that. I will not answer that.
Yes.
But I also think Elizabeth Gaskell's short fiction, which you're saying you haven't read, is, to me, more imaginative than the novels, because she was not restricted by the realist structure in the short fiction that she was restricted to in the novels, because the realist novel was becoming popular in Elizabeth's day. You know, whereas the short fiction, she's got huge amounts of metaphor. You know, we've got gothic coming out there. The old Nurse's Tale is as gothic as you like. You know, the grey woman lying under the table touching the corpse that her husband kicks, you know, is just, this is connected to you, you know, he's kicking you, isn't he? And you're a dead corpse. This is what marriage does to you. And it's so symbolic. And I think they're just brilliant. The short stories, to me, are as good, if not better, than the novels, because she gets that imaginative freedom a little bit more in there. Than they're quite different. There's great variety of short stories, from Mr. Harrison's Confession, that's really funny, to something like Lois the Witch, which is really tragic. You know,
something she has. I feel like some authors kind of, their novels have a similar atmosphere and feel to them, and I love, she seems to have a really big variety.
She does. Yes, that's clearly in her favor, I think. You know, as a favorite, I think you've got to look at the fact that she's able to do that, and she's really grounded. You know, her work is really grounded in place.
Yes.
She's got an amazing, even The Grey Woman is set in Heidelberg, which she loved, you know, in that area, and she visited 3 times.
I have to tell you something about Heidelberg. So you know how she attended Oberammergau, the Passion Play that happens only once every 10 years. Well, I have another series that I adore so much called the Betsy Tacy series. And it's by Maud Hart Lovelace. And she was more kind of, she graduated from high school in 1910. And so this series is semi-autobiographical.
Right.
And it follows her from childhood until when she gets married.
Okay.
And there's one that's after high school and before Betsy's wedding, where it's called Betsy in the Great World. She travels around, and she ended up going to Oberammergau. And since it is semi-autobiographical, that means Maud Hart Lovelace, the author, would have attended. And so I got so excited when I figured out that they had both attended the same Passion Play, not in the same year. That was a really fun connection to me.
Yeah.
The authors that I love so much.
Well, she brought a servant back from Heidelberg. There was a servant who came over to work for her, who I think this woman's mother, this girl's mother, I should say. She was called Caroline Weidemann, this girl, and she's on the 1861 census. Mrs. Gaskell wasn't overly impressed with her as a servant, but that's beside the point. And she didn't like her clothes either. Mrs. Gaskell would have been cancelled by our culture millions and millions of times. But some of the things she said were just, oh dear. Anyway, this servant came over, and I think she was some connection to Madame Moll. Now, Madame Moll had married Professor Moll, who was a German, but they lived in Paris, and she was British. Madame Moll, Mary Clark, she was called, and Mrs. Gaskell knew her and visited her in Paris quite regularly. And I think there were connections between the Weidemann's mother and Madame Moll. So Mrs. Gaskell brought her back to Plymouth Grove to learn English and hairdressing and a few other suitably feminine things that she needed to know. And she was still there. She came over in 1858 to 9. She was still there in 1861. I don't know when she went, obviously, because we've no more census for another 10 years after that. But it's interesting. She loved Heidelberg, and there are quite a few 6 weeks in Heppenheim is set over there, and the Grey Woman is set over there. So she uses her travels, I think, to fund her stories. A lot of them set in Wales, where her family lived. Samuel Gaskell Holland. Samuel Holland, lived over out to Tremaddock, out near Blaenau Festiniog in Wales. And she writes quite a few. Well, Ruth it goes out to Wales.
Yes. And then Sylvia's Lovers, wasn't she inspired after traveling to Whitby?
I don't know. That's one I've not read. I hold my hands up. That is the only one of her novels I have not read.
You know what? I have to say, if you enjoy Wuthering Heights, I think the atmosphere is just as good in Sylvia's Lovers. And I think it's her best kind of nature writing.
Okay.
Yes. And it's really for the autumn time. I rank it above Ruth. For kind of how I prefer them. Yeah, I really.
Oh, right. I might have a look at that then. You've intrigued me enough to try that now. Yeah.
Yes. I don't. Historical fiction and involves press ganging, and so yeah.
It's set in Dracula country, isn't it? Up in Whitby.
Yes. Yeah. So I have so many places, from just reading Victorian literature. I have so many places just scattered across England. I would love to visit.
She went there on holiday as well. So again, that's grounded. But to go back to Wuthering Heights, if ever a book haunts me, that one does.
Yes, it is. I just started a reread of it, and I said to my husband in the evening after I started, I said, "Oh, it is so good to be back in this book. I love it. The language is so grotesque." And he says, "Don't you mean a different word?" I said, "No, I mean grotesque."
Oh, exactly.
Yes.
No, it's brilliant.
It's absolutely brilliant, and just so I love the contrast with how chaotic everything feels, but it's so precisely crafted.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Now I'm curious, in Jenny, do you say Uglow? Is that how you say your last name?
Yeah, that's how I say it. And some people say Uglow. I don't know. I say Uglow. Yeah.
Okay. In her biography of Elizabeth Gaskell, she references a short story called Parson's Holiday. And it sounds really humorous. It's about this person who's just worn out and he goes on a holiday. And I am not able to find this story.
No, I've never heard. I actually, that's news to me as well. I don't know. Okay. I've not come across that either. So is that something to look for?
Yes, it would just be a dream come true if I could read it, because it's published in it was in the Pall Mall Gazette, and I can't remember what year it would have been. But I couldn't figure out a way to, access. It was maybe 1862 Pall Mall Gazette, 25th of April, 1865.
65. The columns of gossip from Paris in the oh yes, August to September of Parson's Holiday in the Yes, I've got that.
Do you really?
No, I've not got the story. I don't know where it is. I will have a route around, and if I find it anywhere, I wonder if it's
anything that sounds kind of like Cranford. I'd love to, read more of it. So I haven't yet read either Mr. Harrison's Confession, so that I'm also planning on in October reading that one too.
That's quite funny, and I started during lockdown for something to do. I dramatised The Old Nurse's Tale for a dramatic reading, which we actually put on as a performance at the house. We were reading, but we were all dressed up and we did the actions and everything. We had an audience, and Jane Baxter, who's one of our trustees, recorded it. And we put it on the website as is it an MP4 or something, MP3, I don't know quite, but it says there's a recording anyway, whatever, and it should be there somewhere. And we have some pictures of us. And while I was bored because I was locked down, I started to work on Mr. Harrison's Confession as a dramatic reading, because I think it's so funny. And I just said to one of our volunteers, Robert Nichols, is a pianist, a quite good pianist. And I said, Robert, what do you think about we do this as vaudeville, so that we can get, the piano going in between the scenes? And he thinks that's a great idea. So that's my project, which is still a work in progress, because I've still got the last few pages of Mr. Harrison to finish and then to read it through. So when we can unlock down, I'm hoping to try and get that out, and we could record it and perhaps put it on the website again.
Yeah. Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah, I'm kind of waiting too. The BBC has put out, radio drama collections of Austen and the Brontes and George Eliot, and so eventually, maybe one day they'll do Elizabeth Gaskell's.
We're still waiting for Mary Barton, but evidently the lady that does To Call the Midwife is supposed to be doing it, and she's so wound up with To Call the Midwife, that she's not got round to Mary Barton yet. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be good if they would do that. I love Mary Barton.
Yeah, it was the last one of hers that I hadn't read. And I just went in, I don't know, with kind of low expectations that I didn't know what to think about the title. And my friend said the synopsis on the back spoiled it. So don't read the back. I went in blind and it just swept me away. I loved
She
it.
wanted to call it John Barton originally, but they wouldn't let her. And then he added Chapman and Hall. John Forster published it for Chapman and Hall. Well, he was the first reader, and he put on A Tale of Manchester Life underneath it.
Wow.
So it came Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life, and it is really a book of two halves, isn't it? It's A Tale of Manchester Life, and then it's Mary Barton's story as well.
Yes.
So yeah, she didn't want it to be Mary Barton originally.
And then how did you find her writing? Was it, you said in school? Was that
I used Mary Barton in school? Yes, I used the first 18 chapters of Mary Barton are pretty much a documentary of Manchester in the 1830s, really. And she married in 1832 and came to Manchester in 1832. So that was, well, I suppose, if you like, her first impressions of the city. She writes about the railway, which opened in 1830 from Manchester to Liverpool, the first railway across joining the two cotton cities of, I think they were the biggest cotton city in Europe, Manchester, I think, at the time. So she was also, we believe, and I'm convinced, a visitor for the Providence Society, who fed into the Manchester Statistical Society, who are very proud of the fact that they were a year before the Royal Statistical Society started in London. Because some of her friends and the congregation of Cross Street Chapel were particularly important in setting that up, as they were in setting up the Mechanics Institute, because they were very into education and social justice and philanthropy. And she visited for them. They used to go and visit and collect information so they could feed it back and decide how best to get these people to help themselves, really, rather than actually just feed them money. But, how can we help you setting up insurance policies for when they were out of work, trying to get them to save when they were in work so that they had the rainy day, money, and this sort of thing. And she was a visitor. And we definitely know that Catherine Winkworth and Susanna Winkworth, who were friends of hers, they lived in Ardwick at the time, visited around London Road Station, which is Piccadilly now, which is one of the big stations near where Mrs. Gaskell lived. And Mary Barton, the Davenports, the cellar dwellers, are actually living just near Piccadilly Station. In Berry Street is literally just near Piccadilly Station. So I guess that she probably got first-hand experience of what these people were actually going through. And the Unitarians also had a Unitarian domestic home mission records. They used to go and visit the poor, and there were records of the visits to these poor people kept at, the Cross Street, obviously, William's Church. And I think she used these as well when she was writing Mary Barton. And she talks of things that she's seen and clearly things that she's read. So I think this was the 1830s when this was actually going on, before she probably had the children. Or maybe when she just had a few of the children. She was living in Dover Street and in the 1830s, and Rumford Street from 1842 Upper Rumford Street, before she moved to Plymouth Grove in 1850. So yeah, I think she was very much involved. And when the cotton famine was on in the 1860s, and she was working in the sewing schools, which they opened to try and give women occupations. They did sewing, they bought material in, the women sewed garments, and then they sold them. They paid the women a very small amount of money and fed them, and they also educated them. And Mrs. Gaskell was saying that she was working in these schools from 9 o'clock in the morning until 7:30 at night.
Wow.
So that was a long day. She was working with the two eldest girls to try and do something in this really, really difficult time. She also called in, some of her friends in high places and asked them if they could sponsor some of these sewing schools so that they could open new ones. in various areas where it was needed in Manchester. So she certainly was very proactive. You know, she didn't sit in the Victorian drawing room anyway.
Yes. She did seem to be very principled and to follow that up with how she lived. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on what another thing that I really just love to know about Elizabeth Gaskell is that she was a working mother. She wrote while having children, and Mary Elizabeth Braddon is one other, female Victorian author I can think of that did that, but it's just rarer. And I think that's really neat. She was kind of able to have both things.
Why do I think that? Because William was very supportive. Mary Braddon, I love Mary Braddon. I've got lots of her books. I just love Mary Braddon.
Oh, I love her books.
And she was really wanted to be taken seriously as a writer, and felt that she had to churn out, penny dreadful stuff sometimes in order to put bread on the table. But her husband, well, her partner, because they weren't married, his wife was, I think, in a lunatic asylum, so she couldn't marry him. Her partner was a publisher, William Maxwell, and so she clearly had a good start. Elizabeth didn't have that good start, but she had lots of friends, and William was very supportive. The Unitarians were not tyrannical. They believed in equality, they believed in reason, they believed in social justice, they believed in tolerance, and William supported her writing. And I think because he, there was no what's obstruction, maybe is the word I would want to say, that there was no obstruction at home. She was allowed to pursue a career, whereas a lot of women weren't allowed or couldn't. And you're quite right. I was discussing this yesterday with one of our visitors. I was on room steward duty at the house yesterday, and I was talking about some of the ladies. I mean, Barbara Hoffland was married, and I think she had children. And she wrote, she needed the money. Her husband was an alcoholic.
And then heard of her. I'll have to look her up.
She's early 1800s. And another woman that I really love, Charlotte Smith.
Okay, I hadn't heard of her either.
Charlotte Smith had lots of children, and she had to write because her husband was a gambler, and she separated from her husband. She wrote some really good stuff. I love Charlotte Smith's work. She was, I think she died in 1806, so she was into the 18th century, really, and probably an influence on Jane Austen, I would have thought, as was Fanny Burney, who also married but only had one son, and wrote good novels, very good novels. And Evelina is probably a forerunner of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And just to kind of bring this up, because we were talking about this yesterday as well at the house, I had a few ladies who were really interested yesterday. Elizabeth doesn't mention Jane Austen. She hardly, really, an odd name drop, just one or maybe two. And yet we were looking at North and South and Pride and Prejudice being very, very similar in their kind of thematically. So we do wonder how influenced Elizabeth was by Jane Austen, even though she doesn't really talk about her, which I think is
interesting
and amazing.
And the really domestic feel of Wives and Daughters. When people run out of Jane Austen, that's why I say read Wives and Daughters. Yeah, it's interesting. She hasn't mentioned it.
I'm not sure Wives and Daughters is quite so domestic as she's saying, though. There's a lot of undercurrents, which is what I think is good about Gaskell. There's so many undercurrents. And about what a
more slice of life where you're following kind of the day-to-day.
More like Middlemarch.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth Gaskell is very into what is and what should be. She's very into inappropriate marriages and what should a marriage be and what's inappropriate, and how you need to be careful that you don't make those inappropriate marriages. And I think it's the same with families. What should a family be and what shouldn't it be? And she shows us what it kind of should be and what it shouldn't be, and let us make up minds for ourselves of what we think.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think Wives and Daughters is very much, Mrs. Gibson, what kind of a mother is she? Well, with a name like Hyacinth, what can you expect? Sort of thing. And Mrs. Hampson, is she called, Roger's mother? What kind of mother is she?
Yeah.
All the old guard seem to be invalids, the way the women were. But then Cynthia's Hyacinth, is a bit too new guard, isn't she? And there's perhaps somewhere in between. There's what maybe you should have. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's interesting you're pointing that out. I'm thinking there are a lot of foils almost, and contrasting characters.
Plus, there's a suggestion that Roger is based on Charles Darwin.
Yes, I've heard that. That's really fun, because she knew the Darwin family, right?
She was related to the Wedgwoods. Her mother was related to the Wedgwoods.
And the Wedgwoods were related to the Darwins?
Yes, because Emma Wedgwood married Charles Darwin.
I see. Okay.
And also another working mother that I just thought of, Anne Marsh Caldwell, who again had to write because they were short of money. That's just come up. I did my MA on Anne Marsh Caldwell. Her father was the lawyer for the Wedgwoods. She was a Unitarian, and her sister married Elizabeth's cousin, Henry Holland. It was very nepotistic, the Unitarian.
Well, I guess maybe you weren't able to get out that much, but you would visit at church and tea time, and so that was your pool to choose from.
Well, also because they were Unitarians, they were dissenters, they were persona non grata with the Anglican Church generally, and they tend to marry their own. And so it's a smaller pond to fish in, so to metaphorically, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is. Well, this has been so lovely to get to learn more about Elizabeth Gaskell and hear all about the wonderful events that are taking place at the house. And thank you very much, Diane, for taking some time out of your day to talk with us.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you for contacting us, and I hope you hook up to the websites and have a look at what's on, and I hope some of your listeners might enjoy some of our events in the future.
Absolutely.
Okay.